Um, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jean Thomas. I'm a political scientist here at the Centre de Sciences Humaines. On the behalf of CSH, it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to our 8th workshop and seminar series here at CSH. As you know, our institution is a multidisciplinary research center with a particular focus on South Asia, from the standpoint of a wide range of disciplinary forte, including sociology, history, demography, geography, anthropology, political science, and so on and so forth. Today, Dr. Arnaud Kaba is going to present. Arnaud is an anthropologist, a social anthropologist, and visual anthropologist that specializes on labor relations in the circulation of skills and manufactured goods at the global scale. He has conducted fieldworks in many countries, including France, Italy, Czech Republic, but his main focus is on India. He currently researches global making processes in the industrial cluster of Firozabad in Western Uttar Pradesh. Arnaud completed his PhD at the École de Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, EHESS in Paris, on metal workers in Bhopal. He's currently a Fritz Thyssen Fellow at the CEMIS, the Center for Modern Indian Studies, in Göttingen, Germany. He has published in a wide range of prestigious journals, including Ethnologie Française, Samaj, and has forthcoming articles coming in Journal of Agrarian Change and Third World Quarterly. Arnaud works on the interplay between, and will present today on the interplay between community and caste in glassworks specialization in Firozabad, with a focus on Bangles and Christmas bowls. After Arnaud's presentation, Professor Ramaswamy will be discussing Arnaud's work. Professor Shankar Ramaswamy is an anthropologist of globalization, migration, urban workers, and religion in South Asia. He's the executive director of the Center for Justice Studies in Jindal, Sonipat. He is currently completing a book entitled South in the Kalyug, the Politics and Cosmologies of Migrant Workers in Delhi. So now, without further waiting, we will give the mic to Arnaud.
Yeah, great. First, would like to thank CSH for having invited me to this wonderful seminar. I'm afraid there will be a bit of delay yet because I got expelled from the Zoom and I cannot connect through. So for today's presentation, I will present the paper that I sent you, Professor Shankar Ramaswamy, which is actually the first version of a paper which has been considered a special issue in the Third World Quarterly. But I will also put the paper into context, in fact, with a wider research project on glass skills, social relations at work, and global commodities that I started 3 years ago. Especially thanks, I want to thank more than also, besides CSH, the Center for Modern Indian Studies and the supervision of Flavia Oja, which, of course, should give a book project and hopefully a book finally. So I will present all this when I should be starting now. PowerPoint could be loaded.
No, I think you did more.
Yeah. That's it.
Wait.
Disable participants.
Wait.
So to start without notice now. So the objective of a project and also of a book project is to follow two commodities, glass bangles and Christmas balls, and put into perspective with my main field work in Firozabad glass cluster, the links between Firozabad and globalized glass network, but also look at the integration of different glass centers in this globalized glass network through a French glass production center in Lorraine, in Meisenthal. And I put them into perspective on this value chain of the Christmas balls because they are both producers of Christmas balls. And for example, every January and September in the Maison et Objets Fair in Vincennes, one can see the production of Meisenthal as well as the production of Firozabad, who are side by side, maybe different buildings. And so they compete, or sometimes don't compete that much, as we'll see, in a globalized production network. The goal, of course, is to try to understand, if possible, a little bit how is globalization transforming the relationships to skill and labor of the glass workers through northern and in the northern as well as southern countries, and all those globalization shape both this kind of glass centers and also how they co-shape each other, because of course their concurrency, their links to global exchanges influences both the glass centers. So the study, as for now, shows that things are much more complex than a blunt frontal concurrence between the southern workforce against the northern one, which basically I believe would be the case. For example, French and Indian Christmas ball makers are more complementary than directly concurrent. Because, for example, in Lorraine, there has been a very strong industrialization in the 1960s, and the Christmas ball production has been reintroduced in the 1990s through publicly subsidized center with a shift of capital. In fact, it's not only industrial capital, the idea is to promote regional tourism, regional culture. And then they produce Christmas ball in a very high bracket, while the Indians produce Christmas balls in a more massive production range. But a range, a bracket, which is still upper in terms of quality and of pretension to status than the mechanized production. So there is complementarity, but there is also concurrence. For example, Jean-Michel Otoniel, which is now the most renowned French contemporary artist working with glass, before made it glass with Mulano and also had a partnership with this glass center in Lorraine, which is making Christmas balls, but also collaboration with artists. And is now making this glass in Firozabad. So that's obviously a direct concurrence. So to say quickly, there are different factors and which complexly interrelate and intermingle to explain these phenomena of integration to the global value chain, that to say it in a nutshell would be phenomena of deindustrialization, reindustrialization in French, and shifting of nature of capital. And in India, which are even more sure about maintaining a switch-off regime, but through integration to globalization, in fact. So these factors are obviously labor cost, everybody thinks about it, but also the cost of automation, because if a production is mostly made by Kaligas or craftsmen until today in Firozabad, it's not just that the industrialists like manual work, but sometimes automation would be more expensive than just maintaining low wages for workers. So this also determines know-how's value. But for know-how's value, for example, I realize that the popular taste is very important. Because why are Indians and French more complementary? Is because centers like Meisenthal, but all the lobbying of crafts goods in France did some efforts to sell after the 1970s the taste of handmade objects to the middle classes. Because through there was a concurrence of the southern workforce, the glass balls industry in France got destroyed mainly by automation and the rise of plastic. Like in the 1970s, everybody loved plastic, everybody loves plastic balls. Nobody saw the use to pay a more expensive glass Christmas balls. So there is a lobbying in Europe also of this producer, which help French, but as well as Indians, because it creates a market. Of course, liberalization played a huge role in India. So Christmas balls are the first export good made by Firozabad. It starts very shyly, I would say, in the 1980s, and it explodes after 1991, obviously. So, I mean, it's just some small insight on a broader study, which is not finished, but to show you the complexity and the interrelation of these factors, to basically demonstrate at least that this kind of studies can unveil the complexity of the phenomenon of globalization, which is not as simple as southern workforce destroying the northern workforce, or automation destroying the skills, but phenomenon of descaling, reskilling, and so on. So to say a few words on the possible contribution to the field of anthropology, well, I would like to favor a discussion, obviously, between anthropologies of fluxes, which are made by Matthew Kay and Boris Petrick, more for commercial global exchanges. Anthropology of techniques in a globalized context that I think is a field brilliantly represented by Yann-Philippe Tastevin, with his studies of rickshaw between Bangladesh, India, and Egypt, and labor studies in India. Hardenez is a strong, of course, source of inspiration. But I would hope to take a bit of Lachandavarka on how he can make a possibly refined analysis of the caste and class relation related to particular context. And of course, in France, there is a tradition of studies of the industrialized areas and their industrialization, or at times, for example, Anne Boria and Laurent Bazin, which work in the region of Lille. And in the particular field of Indian studies, I mean, it's not only me, there is a growing trend on studying the social implication of skills. So Hardenez is working on that, but Thomas Chambers also, as you probably know, did this wonderful book on child and post workers and craftsmen. They build on Group 2 and Samita Sen's previous scholarship, obviously, and so the paper I'm presenting today is also part of Forward Portfolio special issue, so coordinated by Hardenez and Trent Brown. So I just pass quickly on the proposed structure of the book. So first chapter would be on the history of the links between Bengals, Christmas balls, and globalization. Chapter 2 and 3, that would be the extended version of the paper I'm presenting today, would be on skills, social relation, and collective representation in the Bengal and glass industry. Chapter 4 on coercion and resistances and union history. Chapter 5 on craftsmen lives and their quest for independence. Chapter 6 on links from Firozabad to the global networks, so through Moradabad as a trading hub, through the fairs like Noida, and I need to do field work in, it was impossible this year because of COVID, in the Maison Objet Fair, to really understand how the Indians come to sell the models in France. And then the last chapter, building on my field work in France on the phenomena of deindustrialization and reindustrialization, in Lorraine. So, some words on data collection. So I did more than 6 months of fieldwork in India, done with Dr. Shankar Goda, that I want to thank particularly today, and more than 3 months in France. So it did and I learned more than 90 semi-structured interviews, participant observation. I have a practice of flame glass, which is in fact the making of glass through rods that you heat with a flame cutting machine. And yeah, I have a strong use also of visual tools, photo, video, for example. There is a project of a documentary going on. So to introduce this paper structure of 2 chapters on the importance of skills and the links to glass and how it shapes social relations and collective representation in Firozabad, one needs to make a history of Bengals, short history of Bengals making, and then to understand that, I mean, contemporary globalization accelerated exchanges. And the common sense, I mean, we would have opposed globalized Christmas balls to vernacular Bengals production in Firozabad. And it's only partly true. So the origin of glass Bengals is under debate from archaeologists. Some would argue that it comes from the Middle East because there is a strong Bengals industry there from craftsmanship from the Middle Ages. Some other that it's totally vernacular. I would not enter in this debate, but the sources are easily available from the colonial times, from the 19th century. At that time, there is a lot of Bengals production as artisanal everywhere in India. But there is a particular strong cluster in the region of Firozabad. Firozabad, there is no production of Bengals at that time, it's only a trading hub. These Bengals are produced by a Muslim caste called the Manihars. That will take later when in Firozabad, the industry raises the title of Sheeshgarh, so glassmakers, basically in Urdu. This is made in what is called the chalpati. It's a small furnace, not very, like maybe 50 centimeters height, which is powered by wood or coal in some versions in Firozabad that have disappeared. And the Bengal making process is in fact very slow. It's one by one. You take a glass wire and you put it in a stone cone called the kalbout, and then it gets stretched in the cone. So you have to make the Bengals one by one. It's pretty slow. And the first industrial Bengals don't come at all from India. They come from Czech Republic. Because in the 1960s, glass trader called Arnaud Kaba had sent trace agents everywhere in Asia to take some samples of glass artifacts, bring them back to Czech Republic, which is this part of Bohemia, which is specialized in glassworks since 700 years at least, and to invent cheap chain ways to produce them. He finds a way to produce Bengals with cylinders of glass that he cuts with a machine, and then he sends it to India. And it has a huge success. He's opening offices in Paris, in Berlin. So the first industrial Bengals, which look like the Bengals we see now, because the traditional Bengals are in fact thicker. They come from Europe. And Firozabad is built in response to this, to this invasion. So mainly Indian, I guess with the help of a British, but industrialists, built this cluster. They automatize and they industrialize the process. Not automatize, they make a serial process. So the collective narratives, at least a majority of them, would stress that a certain Rustam Ustad, which was a Sheeshgarh master craftsman, would be the inventor of this industrial Bengals technique, which consists of, instead of wiring every single Bengal, put a continuous wire into an axis turning, like a turning axis, which is called the belen. So it makes a very long spire. And then one cuts the spire, and then the Bengals are finished. So this, of course, multiplies the speed by 10. Well, archives show that many skills come from abroad. A lot from Europe. For example, the manager of the first glass factory in Firozabad, one of the first, is an Austrian called Mosina. The furnace designs come, in fact, from Japan. So it's very hard to understand or to really know who made what. But obviously, the Sheeshgarhs who are still there today would more emphasize their input, while the Westerners have left around the 1930s. So what are these industrial Bengals techniques? So the Zitwa are perfect, which have been made serious. So I'll present quickly a small video because it's better to explain with images, I think. The process has barely changed since 1908. So first, it's lagging anyway. First, these workers take the glass, we say cueillir in French, from the main furnace. In fact, these workers are different names because and each step of the glass design making that will finally become the wire, you have a different name of post, of job. So you have gundivalas and bolvalas. I'll explain a bit further. This small glass ball is a gundi. You cannot take more glass the first time. So it's the first layer of glass, which would then get transferred and shaped by people who are gundivalas. Both are gundivalas, in fact, they shift. Half an hour you shape the glass, half an hour you go to the furnace, because, for example, in summer, the close to the furnace is 60 degrees, so no one can withstand 1 day of your basically close to the furnace. Then you may make a second, let a second layer of glass. So yeah, pass a bit more quickly because of time. So this is called ball, and the guys making them at ball. So it's basically second layer. Then it gets colored. There's a little bit of color in the main furnace, but it gets, for the shining of the bangles, you may apply a second layer of concentrated color, which has been made in the main furnace by night. So the craftsman making this is called the bativala, and you have this assistant that is not visible there, which is a tender bativala. So then you see it's a bit different color with this layer of concentrated color. Then you have a last layer of glass, to really drown the color in the glass. And then this is a lom, which is the final design. These are the ones, of course, shaping the lom, are lom valas. Then we go to the second main post of the factory. This is the sikai kibati, like sikaya, like when you cook chapati. So of course, it's the reheating oven. So it's two people. The pelvala will give again the final shape to the design, and the sikaya will really heat it a bit, that it gets very very soft to be wired. So this is a hot lom, which is called garam lom, and the one bringing the garam lom is very logically called the garam lom vala. Then we come to the principal stage, which is the belen. So this is the belen bati, and inside this small furnace turns this famous axis on which the spiral will be made. So the one giving the rod is a garam lom vala, and this guy making the wire is the tarvala. So this is the most prestigious position in a factory. For example, in the 200 people factories, we'll have maybe 6 or 7 tarvalas only. So it's very rare. They get double to triple wage. So it's much higher than the other positions. So, but through its already very skilled, it's also a very hard job. So they say it's both of Maynard, hard work, and DMAC brain. Because you need to hold, this very hot rods, but also you need to stay focused, in this wire to be continuous. It has to run continuously for days in the factory, which lasts for 10 hours. And then, as you see, the most difficult technique already you have a regularity of the wire, but is to in fact hook the wire to the axis, because then the spring completes, one takes him out, and then you need to make another spring. And from this, it's very hard to show even in video, but you have a needle inside the axis, and so they need to aim, and they stretch. In fact, that's why they melt two rods. They stretch the glass, so it makes a wire. It's like fishing, but with molten glass. And then you catch the needle, but it's turning like 100 tons a minute, so it's pretty hard. And this is you see that the balance, the axis, are now turning in an automatic fashion. This is the only change in 100 years, 110 years now in the labor process, and it only happened 20 years ago, before some guys were turning the balance manually. And this made the work even harder for the tarvalas, because before you needed 40 seconds to make one spring. Now it's one spring every 20 seconds. So usually tarvalas after 40 years old need to retire. They have very bad sight also, because it destroys the sight to aim all the day at molten glass. So to finish quickly with other stages, because of course if I stay too much into the details, I'll miss time. Then this is an interesting image. This is a father teaching his son. So before factory closes, you have less imperative of production. So the masters, ustads, can teach their apprentice, shagird, it's his son, using this time where production is not so important, to transmit the skills. Which make a good transition to the next part on the social value skills. But before going to the next part, I just explain quickly the last stages. Then you see the spire, and it's cut by a cut vala with a diamond here, and then it's put into small packets of 123 bangles, which is taller, and then these bangles are then finished in the houses of the mohalla. This is house work, and then again, for many of them, decorated. So as you see, as you guess, the labor organization is in fact an extremely complex system that I don't have the time to describe in world detail. There are three phases. First is factories, one I showed. Second is the finishing in households, and then decoration of Bengals. And there are very different organization of work in the three phases, but also within the phases. So I'll just stay at the Bengal factories. For example, of course, all workers are in the informal sector, and there is a wide use of tekadari system, but it can change. If you take a small factory in a Muslim neighborhood, the owner would manage directly the workers with the help of a supervisor, and then someone called the Jagaya from Jaga, the place, will take workers from the labor market, the mandi, the labor shop where people gather to find jobs, or would go to the mohallats to take the workers to work. And he also often takes care of distributing wage. If it is a bigger factory, then there is use of a tekadari system. Tekeda is a quite well-known figure in India. So he's basically a labor contractor and an intermediary. So he will be paid by production, following production by the owner, and will take care himself to discipline labor, to distribute wages, to make advances, which also widely, like in many industries in India, a widely spread system of advances that is at the same time banding but protecting workers. It's quite a complex issue. What is not complex is pretty clear is that the conditions in factories are really terrible. I mean, it's there's no overward 50 degrees in the factory and 60 degrees close to furnaces. Days of work, there has been long-lasting union struggles to reduce the day to 8 hours per day, so it will be already a 48 hours a week. It never worked except for some years, so it's 11 hours with, of course, no overtime paid. In finishing and decoration, in terms of physical harshness, of course, it is less. But then you have many health hazards because the people who finish the Bengals. So everybody finishes Bengals almost in Firozabad, but mostly Koris, one Dalit caste is only dependent on it because they don't have any other entries in better paid jobs or class. Child labor is really was strong everywhere in Firozabad. Not it's a bit less in the factories, I think, because they also hide it, but it's a widespread in houses, and still it's made with kerosene lamps. So the kids breathe kerosene, from 5 a.m. to late night, and parents, especially for the kids, they puke a lot because of this. And in the decoration workshop, I cannot enter in details on this because of the time, but you have all kinds of polluting and toxic glues, glittering substances, and it's all terribly unhealthy. And the workers are the first to highlight these issues. I mean, it's not analysis; they keep saying it, of course. In factories, also, they often show their burnt ends. Say, or directly, if you want to see more condition, look at my hands. It's really bound to have this of anyway. So all do the skills shape this labor relations, these social relations. So most obviously among the Sheeshgarhs, which are the first to master these skills and which I studied first, there is, as a general thing, a strong narrative of decadence, which is probably strengthened by the political situation in UP, which, as you know, has shown in the past years a gradual, even stronger and gradual marginalization of Muslims. So, of course, there is a feeling of grief. There's been a modification of master-apprentice or ustad-shagird relations, because before these relations really took place in the mohalla of the popular neighborhoods. And it was also a sign of independence, because Sheeshgarhs have always had, maybe less though, but always worked in the factories, always had the monopolies of some position, like the Tarbala ones, especially the Tarbala ones. But they were also warring Bengals in their neighborhoods with small chal batis, with small traditional furnaces in Firozabad. But this has gradually disappeared, according to the narrative, and it got stopped in 1996 because the court, Supreme Court, issued an order because of pollution to forbid coal and wood as a fuel for glass industry. So all these, small independent furnaces have disappeared. So they lost the transmission, or in their mohalla, they also lost a kind of independent activity, where even if they work in a factory, they also had, this thing to be a bit independent. There is a question of dispossession by spending of skills. So the narratives would say, general narratives, which have been, of course, cross-checked, that until the 70s, they had a strong monopoly of the Tarvala skills. But then it passed gradually to other Muslim castes, which was not so much of a problem or not presented so much as a problem for respondents, but also to Hindus. No, the Yadavs, many Tarvalas, especially in the industrial area, in the bigger industries, are Yadavs, which are a dominant caste locally in the neighborhood countryside around Firozabad. So how did it pass? By studying how it passed, I think it's really possible to unravel some of the stakes, triggered by skills transmission. So first, in 2019, the first thing people said was, yeah, it passed through friendship links. But friendship links are always mixed with strange patronage relations. This is true for Muslims to Hindu. This is true within the Sheeshgarh caste. When a Tarvala takes a Mutiya, the one taking the spring is his apprentice as an apprentice, it would be a chansha. It would be inferior, as he would have to go to the cigarette shop for him. If he drinks, he would have to take alcohol for him. He would have to clean shoes for him. But many people said at the beginning, we didn't really believe it, but not so many people say it, and all Tarvala said, even I saw it, so I think it is true, that it passed also through sexual trade, also with, especially for Hindus. So I take you as an apprentice, but you let me sleep with your wife at night. So this was apprentice pretty widespread, especially on the first killings. No, there is less stake because anyway, many Hindus know the Tarvala job and can skill over Hindus. Some respondents told us that it was also a choice of the factory owners, because some factory owners had resistances, collective resistances of Muslim Tarvala, some Hindu owners, and some said enough, and they forced, the skilling of Hindus also to be able to have more communitarian grip, on some reluctant Tarvalas. One of the main, because that's the general discourse, but there is an extreme complexity and combination of factors, influences in a single relation, and common interests are very strong. There are real friendships. There are cases when someone will say, for that one, that they took someone into pity, someone which is very poor, which has no job, so they say, okay, I will teach you some skills. But common interests are pretty common and would break, this a bit rigid if you just think according to this communitarian or caste factors. So let me present two particular examples, Shabazz and Zakir. So Shabazz is a young Mutiya, so he's a Tarvala to be, he's learning the skill of Tarvala that we met. We wanted to make a part of the documentary about him. And when I met him 3 months ago, he was working in a small factory with his father. And getting his first Tarvala, is getting skilled at Tarvala. So we'd say, okay, absolutely classic skilling structure. There are Sheeshgarhs within the traditional so-called Tarvala caste, favor to sound skilling. But he got fired from the factory because he was not making the tars so well. So now he was in search of work, really disturbed, and he found work in a factory led by a Hindu owner. And now his Ustad is a Yadav, so in Hindu. And for Shabazz, from what he told us, I think it's interesting because he got 80% skill by his father, but then to get new skills is also getting out of also seeing other things, getting out of his father's influence. But then I asked them, did we see that you don't know, because skilling is about family links, very strong links that you don't know. Yeah, took you as a shagim. And he told me, what? He needs relief. Because you need relief. If you don't have a son to teach, you don't have an assistant, it's a very hard work. So the guy you teach, he gives you relief. I need some skills, but I don't need to be taught all the skills. I'm pretty independent. I just need to perfectioning. So it's a pretty good relationship of common interest. And when there is common interest, there's not that much question of community, hatred, distrust, which of course exists in Firozabad, especially in UP now that Yogi has been re-elected. Zakir Hussain is which is called, by the way, Shankar Zarif in my paper because of anonymization. Zakir Hussain is also someone I know very well in the field, and you know, he was one of the most virulent in the fieldwork about this discourse of we are the Muslim, we are the top. It's a common discourse in sense. Thomas Chalmers talks about the same discourse in his book on child and gold, and we got betrayed because we gave the skills to the Hindus, and then there is the idea that expectation of recognition that get turned into marginalization, in fact. But this is a general discourse. And but he's also inventing a 5 minutes. So, but I'm reaching the end of this. It's my last slide. So he's where was I? Yeah, in fact, he's inventing a machine to so I told in the details in 5 minutes of machine, but to basically put glitter to Bengals in a safe way that we don't have these emanations of glittering, and it uses a TV circuit to power 600 volts in a total Zugad bricolage system. It ionizes the particles with a magnetic field and so it causes the Bengals. And for this, he associated with a Hindu TV repair, and I said, "So what? You know, we have all this discourse on Hindu Muslim and then what?" And he's very scared of his Muslim competitors, of course, and he hides, you know, the modest secret. He told me, "Yeah, but we have common interest. You know, this guy, if I produce more machines, he needs me, and I need to give a secret, so it's fine." And he said at the end, "Yeah, we have our house, but we need to live with each other in this country," and this is. Typically, I link it to what Thomas Chalmers calls perform convivialities. For example, and put all these interest-led or work-led relations between Hindus and Muslims that eventually go well, because you have to, it is for work. So I jump on the rise of Yadav. But to analyze the complex phenomena triggered by relation to skill, I propose the operative concept in the book of threat consciousness. So what is threat consciousness? Very simply, is as class consciousness is your class identity relation, your position in relation to production triggers social change, is all your relation to the skill acts as a social force. So I have 3 minutes. So 2 examples on this. So one is the Tarkash Union. So I'll go very quickly on it. In the 1970s, there was a quite powerful union only made of Tarvalas, both Yadavs and Sheeshgarhs. So it's, I mean, totally for me, threat consciousness. So it's a union absolutely made on one specialty, made of one shared skill. But then they were struggling for all the working classes because they thought that as Tarvalas and the most essential workers, they had to be the forefront of the struggles, everyone, because you just need 5 Tarvalas to stop a factory. If 10 unskilled workers go on strike, you just get 10 over in the market. It has no impact. Second example would be the example in Kushva and Agar, which I have unfortunately to describe very quickly. But so there is a neighborhood in Firozabad populated by Kushvahas, and they became specialists of glass statues making. So it's with gas lamp, you just sculpt a statue. And of course, Kushvahas are not at all in the glass trades normally. So we, with Goda, we did, I think, a precise work of tracking the skills. So this all came from Agra in the 1980s. These new machines, new for Firozabad. And then at that time there was one Kushva called Vailal, but also one Patan, one Vishvakarma and one Thakur, which were both practicing this skill, and they were both friends. They said the Kushva a bit aside. But then it became commercialized. On the Khans, it just went to one family. And even in the Muslim world, they want to distribute the skills. Pulvayala distributed the skills to his extended family, hence to the Pushpas, because it went with some extended families. And then after the Hindu-Muslim wars, Pushpas gathered in a single mohalla. And so then it goes spreading the whole mohalla. So that's, I think, a good example of what I call threat consciousness is you get some skills and then it shares the mohalla. I mean, Kushbas land, chefs to each other. They spread skills to each other, and that's we can talk about this in conclusion. And they also skill some tacos, because then it becomes also the mohalla is very important. And in opening, I think, and people told me in Firozabad, it may become even more important than the caste, to explain the identity through skill and how it's shaping the social relations in Firozabad. So for opening remarks, I have no more time.
2 minutes.
Yeah. So you know, to open with a wider question that should the structure of the book. So as you understood, which is only one part of transformations influenced by globalization that shape also the daily relations of work, and interplay with shaping of relation by skills and logics of transmission. Because, for example, if you take this glass cutting machine, it's a machine which appeared in the 1970s in France, you know, in Europe, I mean. So it obviously comes from Europe, and it gives new paths, you know, new ways for some of our communities to grow up. Or, for example, the development of export made the Yadas even more prominent, because they went in these new factories, and they become now they are much more dominant than the Muslims on glass blowers, on export goods. But also, if you take the mold industry has bloomed, and this is made by barais, so they're carpenters, while mold making is a metallurgy, you know, metal works. So they're not metal workers, but some barais got into this business, it developed in their galleys, and then yeah, I mean, so many of them are into this business now. So through the idea that, and many people thought that it may be the locality. It happens that a caste is from a locality, so it gets specialized. But Kushba in the village don't do glassworks. They do it in Agra, in some localities. And that took us so long to understand, at least me, Sheeshgarhs are only bound to glass making in Firozabad. Manias exist, because then recently I asked the circle of wedding, and they were the boys to Sheeshgarh or Mania women from Ghaziabad, from Lucknow, and these people have led glassworks since generations, you know. And they forgot to do some. If they have money in the town, they would take a Siddiqui title. They don't even have a Shish title anymore. So to not be too long, I won't stress everything, but I will stress also the huge role of informatization in the changes of relations. This is first because now so many workers like Kushbahas can learn techniques in YouTube. In fact, they just watch YouTube videos. There are YouTube channels of glassmakers, and you can. So there is a spreading of skills. Many people, even in France, say, you know, how can it be secret with YouTube now? But also they use Facebook and WhatsApp to build trading networks, especially with cannabis smoking objects, which get sent directly, for example, to US. And this cuts the traditional networks of Bangles, which both all the commercial networks and in majority the factories. And of course, it accelerated so much globalized processes. I will complain on this because when you want to make Christmas balls for a French entrepreneur, you go by plane now and pretty easily to Paris to present your own models. But once you have the contract, he sends the blueprints directly by WhatsApp. It gets sent to the barais for the mold making, or sometimes the mold making workshop in the factory to not lose the secrets. Then it gets sent to production, and then you know, it gets sent. It can be done in one day, and I think it's a big difference because I said that it was a bit globalized phenomenon before. But Albert Sachs, it took him maybe 10, 15 years to get the design. You know, it would take few hours. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Arnaud, for this extremely detailed presentation with a lot of first-hand accounts that we all very impressed about. Professor Shankar Ramaswamy, would you like to unmute yourself and jump in?
Sure. Hello.
We can hear you.
Thank you for the paper, Arnaud. I know we have met before at different labor-related conferences, but I don't think I've not been able to really get into your work. So this is a good chance for me to understand what you're doing, and I was happy to see your plan for the larger work. So I just want to respond with about, let's say, 4 points, with most of the emphasis on the first one, which I think is perhaps your core interest in this paper. I hope you can hear me okay. And that's the question of skills. Who gets to join into this work? Who gets to get skills? Who gets to move up in the hierarchies of the workspace? Who does not? How fluid is this process and how restricted is this process with respect to certain considerations of caste, of gender, of religious community, also perhaps age, which comes into it. Now, I guess my first question that I wanted to ask you, since I did not see it specified here, you might have talked about it in some other part of the work, which is why do you feel these are important questions to ask, Arnaud? Now, from the standpoint of an economist, because I have seen some work on sectors like this, for example, the sari weaving industry of Banaras. Now, I get the sense that that's not your framework here. It could be, but I don't think it is. And I wanted to get a sense of what is actually what are the normative concerns or ideals that are behind these questions, which would make it a little more clear why you are pursuing them in this detail. I get the sense that you are interested in certain things like access, openness, mobility, perhaps in contrast to restrictions, closedness, rigidity, perhaps even some ideal of equality there. I don't know exactly. Maybe it's something else. At the end of my remarks, maybe we'll come to that. But this is certainly a question I had while reading your paper. Now, some of the considerations that I think that you bring in answering these questions, I apologize if there's some repetition with your detailed presentation, but this is just useful for me to write down what are the things you're looking at. And some of those elements seem to be insularities to do with family, to do with caste, to do with the mohalla, locality, to do with patriarchy, casteism, communal distancing. Perhaps also self-interest as a consideration in answering who gets skills and who does not, who gets to join, what's the nature of the mobility with these workspaces. But then you have some kind of other register, which this can also move into. And there you use terms, I think, like trust. I mean, I'm not sure I wrote this down, bhaichara, fellowship, friendship, dosti, though you've now said in your presentation, I think that is also mixed up with certain kind of self-interested concerns. You talk about conviviality, eating together, sitting together, and so forth. And then these narratives about cheating, the ways in which skills get sort of appropriated or taken, and sexual relations with wives, that's also there. So there are all of these things. And somewhere along the line, it seems that these insularities might give way in this continuum to some of these other things through what you call porousness, leakage, blurring, transversal solidarities. Now, I hope I've understood this correctly, but I'll try to come back to why I think these are some interesting considerations. But before moving on, I just wanted to pose another question, which has been very important, as you know, in the history and ethnography of skilled work in factories, which is what about the skill transfer from workers to management, Arnaud? That's, of course, a very important concern in the history of capitalism, which is another kind, it's a leakage, which is critical to the exploitation of process. And at least among skilled, I worked on metal workers and in Delhi, and certainly this is something that they're aware of, that they are hired by managements in order to actually learn about the work process and how to enhance production and quality. You cannot learn this from management. You only learn it from the karigars or the karigars who are promoted to supervise. But even they, once they become supervisors, unless they're really doing the work every day, they also don't know how to push forward in the process. I don't know actually if that's a consideration in the factories you're looking at, this constant imperative to raise production and quality. I don't know, maybe there are certain limits on that. But certainly you've made this, in your description, you talked about the sort of class which is not really involved in production, and then all those who are. So what about the leakages there that happen? Is that important at all to your study or to the workers themselves? Second, I thought this was very interesting and surprising, which is this ethos of independence that you're talking about. And that's going to be a concern, I think, of a whole chapter of your work from what I saw. You talk about this understanding of gulabi, I guess that's what they say, the slavery of the guru-apprentice relationship as involving deference and submission. And so they prefer to learn skills in the workplace. Now, I have some questions here. First of all, obviously, is wage work seen by workers as gulabi, also of a different kind, perhaps, involving deference and submission, perhaps to others, to the master karigars, to the supervisors, and so forth. How do they talk about that gulabi with relation to this gulabi? I mean, I assume gulabi here is a variant of gulami, I assume. Now, secondly, question.
Sorry for the spelling mistake here. I did in the paper in gulabi and gulami. Just to be sure I understand you well, which are the two gulamis in your point?
One is the slavery that workers are saying they wish to avoid by getting into traditional relations with a guru, correct? This is page 12.
Yeah. That's right.
This paragraph at the bottom. And I think you also mentioned it in your talk. They resist this deference and submission. These are the words here. They prefer, it seems, to develop, or one person is saying, to avoid this slavery by learning skills in certain other ways in the workplace. Isn't that what you're arguing?
Yeah, sure.
So the other gulabi I'm talking about is the gulami, that's the wage work relation itself of workers to their hierarchy. It could be master karigars, supervisors, management. That's a very kind of dominant metaphor that I encountered, certainly, all kinds of metaphors for doing, and it's certainly not amongst wage workers alone. There are all kind of people who are in employment who perceive what they're doing as a certain kind of gulami that they wish to be free from. And they wish to be independent. So for wage workers, migrant workers, for example, who are also in your study, there is often, this wage work is contrasted with farming for themselves, which is not gulami, but hard to make a good and stable income. Now, so that of course always arises when talking about these kind of situations. So you have the Ustad Shagird relation, you also have the worker management relation, but it's not to me clear in your paper how this traditional relationship to the Ustad, I don't know if that's outside or inside the factory, is different from the relation to the Ustad or the master karigar in the workplace that this worker is talking about. So maybe that could be clarified a little. What is that I was not clear to me. And I should also say, I mean, this may not be connected directly to your work, but at least in my work on karigars in the metal factory, the way that people learn metalworking there is you're always trained by an ustad. as a helper. You sit at the machine and you learn. There are many considerations for why this might occur, why you might be taken on by an ustad. It could be kin relation, village relation. It also could have nothing to do with that. It could just have to do with a certain kind of affinity or something else that I didn't see in this paper, which is the perception of the ustad that you are qualified to learn, that you have the sort of what they call akal. You have the mentality and ability to learn. That's also very important because you're going to invest in that person. They must be a good student. And when you see someone who has great interest and is picking it up, that can be the criteria. That is very important, or a criteria that's very important. But also another criteria that I found, it may not be applicable in your case, but the Karigars felt a kind of duty to do this because that's the way they learn. They all learn through some ustad. Everybody has an ustad. And so if someone else wants to learn, it's also part of the trade is you teach others. Okay, but of course I'm talking about a sector of metal workers, which is in a big city like Delhi. They're migrant workers. They're not traditional karigars. It's not caste oriented. It's not religious community oriented at all. You might find a more similar situation to your workplace if you go to, say, Moradabad. All right, I want to say a word about that. Now, there is something in this paper which I feel you're talking about. You're trying to get to, which is the everyday social relations in the workspace. I don't know. I want to ask you if you're interested in this. But how do you get a closer sense of that? And when you say you have done mostly interviews, I know you've also probably done some on-site ethnography too. It's very hard to get at that every day through interviews and even through being there. But I think that sometimes when you are making claims about what is happening in the workplace, it could be a little bit more vivid as to what you are talking about in terms of the everyday social relations. I don't know exactly how you get to that, and we don't have that many good examples in ethnography, but we have them in North America and in Europe. That I look to sometimes to see, which give you a sense of what's happening there every day, which might, strengthen this argument about what's happening with skills. But I just want to flag, to going my final point, some words that you use in the paper, Arnaud, I think could be a little clearer, at least for me, what you mean when you mean it. So for example, community, which you bring in early. Sometimes I feel it means caste, sometimes religion, sometimes communities of practice. And I guess it would be helpful to know what you mean when. There are some other words that you use that I think also, when you could use some clarification, like absorbed, overlap, leakage, core. For example, I don't know what core meant. I don't know what social force means. I don't know what caste occupational essence means. I certainly don't know, outside the context of the Christian Trinity, what consubstantiality means when applied to Firozabad workers. So a little spelling out of this would help, unless, I don't know, it's possible. Sometimes I wonder if these are terms in use in perhaps French discourse in sociology or anthropology that I just am not familiar with. And when they translate, you're meaning something there that I don't know about. But there's one more at the end, and that's my final point, which again, I have a question mark about, which is consciousness. So consciousness here means consciousness of what? This is what I wanted to do. Do you mean identity? You talk about different usages in the paper: job consciousness, craft consciousness, trade consciousness, social consciousness. Then you move in the end of the paper, it seems, to collective solidarity, communitarian solidarity, class consciousness, collective resistance, social struggle. Yeah, actually, I'm not sure about what these things mean. So I wanted to know, by consciousness, do you mean identity? You use that term. Or do you mean some kind of political understanding and or self-understanding? Which sounds like what you're getting at towards the end when you talk about these Karigar-led struggles for less working hours, which seem to be kind of showing you the gamut of understanding from skill, craft, trade, to something like class within an industry. I also forgot, you mentioned in your presentation a kind of mohalla consciousness. That's another one. So I would like to, I think it would help if you could parse these somewhere clearly, and also to know whether consciousness, in fact, that word is doing the work you want. Because when you use it in connection to workers, especially when you bring in class consciousness, I don't know if you are, if you are like many other labor historians, Marxist historians, if class consciousness is the telos for you, so that all these other kinds of consciousnesses that you're talking about, these are all only interesting to us insofar as they enable, lead to, or obstruct class consciousness. Okay, is that also your ethos? If so, perhaps you could say so. And since you've done ethnography, it would also be interesting to know, and I think it would enrich the labor studies, though we normally don't talk about this, is that view that class consciousness is the telos by which we actually give value to all these other kind of consciousnesses. Is that also what the workers are telling you? If so, that would be good to know. If not, why not? And what are the implications of it? Okay, thank you for this very interesting paper. I hope we can have further discussions in the future about your work.
Thank you, Shankar Ramaswamy, for your detailed comments. Arnaud, would you like to elaborate on those before we open the floor for questions?
Of course, I would like to elaborate on those. So thank you, Shankar, for these excellent comments, which will help me to frame my work, which is still a bit, as we say, out from the field. So it's really good that I have this presentation and your comments. Just before going back to France and properly framing all this, especially that this paper is under revision. So it's really good to enhance it. So of course, I won't answer in details to every single comment because it would take too much time to the discussion. So why is it important to look at the skills and the social meaning of skills? Well, I mean, I could hide behind, Thomas Chambers, which also thinks that studying skills in is important for the city's identity and social relations. To hide under the name, I did it a bit in the presentation, or to hide, a bit with Ames, who says that this study of skill and this craftsman social organization are in fact making a ground break to the history of labor, because for so long we thought that industry has come under only Western influence, and it highlights the vernacular influence in industry. But I will also come to why it is important for me. It is important for me because, as I try to demonstrate, maybe not so clearly, because I'm still elaborating my arguments, as you saw, these skills are the condition of existence of the class, because they are the conditions of existence of the industry itself. If there was no Tarvala skills in Firozabad, there would not be a glass industry surviving in Firozabad. In Hyderabad, Pakistan, there is a glass industry. They make Bengals. Some are planted at Sheeshgarh were migrated, but there is much less employment, because it's automated. The role of the Tarvala is automated. But the Bengals made by machine are less round than the ones made by Tarvala. So the fact that some have these skills, so some skills get transmitted, and that's a really important link with the value of the object in the market, creates the condition of possibility of existence of work through full class consciousness. And I'll come to the last point because it's of course the most important for me. What I mean by consciousness is the classical Marxian definition indeed of an identity plus identity which you are self-conscious and which makes you try to do things to reproduce the existence of your work, but not better your relationship to production like in class, but also your trade, you know. So it's of course an agent of collective solidarity of struggles. Let's say it's a dynamic identity, you know, an identity which changes society. Like said by Karl Marx in the German ideology. But what I would totally disagree with the classical Marxist historians of labor is that, and that's exactly the concept of class consciousness, that all these consciousnesses are only useful in terms of being part of the big class telos. What I'm trying to demonstrate is that if there is no Tarvala skills in Firozabad, there is no class telos because there is no glass working class, because it gets automated. And that's it. So there are different factors, like the value of the good itself. But what I'm trying to demonstrate is that the skills transmission is also extremely important, that the skills reproduction is extremely important, and that the appartenance to a skill, the will to reproduce a thread through your own skills is at least as important as class and caste and gender in determining the social relations, which means also the daily social struggles. And that's the sense of consciousness in the daily worker's life of Firozabad. And they indeed tell me on saving their crop, they indeed tell me on bringing their kids out of the working class. They almost never talk about class consciousness, true. And that's for me the very important point. Let me get to the other remarks. But about the fact to skill, you know, that Kaligar's skill and train the staff at the management. Actually, it's thank you for this very interesting remark. I mean, because it's something I heard in the field that owners get in fact skill the few knowledge of work that they are, because it's not like, by the way, in my PhD thesis, it's really interesting because I was working on metal workers in Bhopal. I'll come back to this. But then if it's like in Bhopal, it was very small. It was very small workshop. And it's bigger industry, so there's much more distance between the owner and the workers. But indeed, they're skilled by the Carrigars. The Carrigars say it, so it's a very interesting point to look at. And as you said, yeah, and yeah, I totally apologize if it's not clear, but of course, it's clear because the main stake, when much understood my main theoretical point, of course, the main stake is to understand these interrelations about the idea of reproducing your trade, getting valuables through skills, and your position of class, better the daily work relations. So there is no class consciousness in the. But there was, I cannot enter in the union history, there was a political consciousness more around 2009, where you had a really powerful C2 union that got broken down. But there is at least what I would call following, you know, Jonathan Patton's argument in the migrant construction site workers, which are not unionized at all, could consider everyday collective resistance at work also, some of them on the conditions. Could we consider it as what he calls contextual stress struggle? So there is this intermingling, you know, which is extremely subtle and would take a very long time to understand. Well, I try to analyze my data, but of course, you know, you can have people who struggle with a union in the factory, but who have their independent business in the mohalla. I don't think I use the term mohalla consciousness because I certainly not the concept like this. And yeah, about with skills. So yeah, I have much data on this. So more on the glasswork. In fact, in Bhopal, I talked to you from the metal workshop. They really insisted that it was a Timak Kakam, you know, no, not that Kakam. And so that the guy needed to have Passan, but he need to be smart, basically, you know, is the, you know, to have test DMAC. And this is said also in Firozabad. This is said, for example, in a glass sculptor, they insist on the power of imagination, or you're able to do jugad. But they insist because the tar, you've seen the tar batis. I mean, it's really hidden. It's hidden. So it's very hard to, in these other jobs, you could catch the skills, like your neighbor makes glass sculptor, basically you can catch it. But as the tar is hidden, people really insist that, okay, you have all this, but the Ustad relation, Sheeshgarh relation in the sense that you need to build this privileged relation is essential. And what is different for metalworks, I think, is and it's really something for glassworks, because I could talk about in France, but I won't take too much time, but it is the lack of access to the means of production. Because if it's glass sculptor, it's easy to access a glass machine, but there is 5 balance in the factory. So if you're not favored by some guy, you will never access a ballet already to try. Similarly, in France, in fact, so all the glass factories have collapsed. In the place I'm studying, you have just this reintroduction, but of crystal was making, but crystal factories remain. And what people complain, they say, many said, you can't demonstrate your skills. Because if you're not a friend of the foreman, basically, you will never get to try crystal, because a crystal furnace uses so much gas. It's even hotter burning melting point than glass. And it's so expensive because the Christmas, the bottles, they make cognac bottles, it's 5,000 euros a bottle. So if you don't have a good relation, they'll never get you to try, in fact, and you'll stay below. So you have this access, which is very important. You're absolutely right that the everyday relations at work are something I want to get to. And it has been bluntly studied by the NEV. After quite a long field work, I have to admit that I probably won't make it because I focus first on skills. And I remember that when I was making my first research project, I was saying, yeah, well, I want to work on skills. So many people have worked on craftsmen. You have this on labor relation. Why don't we mix both? Well, because it's really hard. It took just so long and so much energy in interviews, but also in the factories to understand the skills transmission and all. I mean, to be honest, it's really long to understand. For example, for so long, I believe that, because people said we do all the works, then you become Tarvala. But then I realized that, in fact, it's not really true. You have to approach the Belen as a space. And they say, I know all the work, but sometimes it's not true. You're just the son of Tarvala, he teaches you directly, then you say, I do all the jobs. Sometimes it's bullshit. Sometimes it's true. Some say, I did all this, and you get a better Tarvala. It's extremely complex. So to go to the working relations, it's everyday relations at work is very interesting. It needs a lot of fieldwork, because I talked about, because the thing is that I'm focusing on the skills as part of identity of people, but also of the city. And so I choose to look on many skills, but I just talked about the Bengals factory. But the glass blowing factories are a bit similar, but little bit different organization, which also says according to the size. Then you have the everyday relations in the July. Then the everyday relations in the decoration workshop. Then you have independent workshops, for example, glass sculpting. And if you really would like to do something really complete, you should look at all the barais in these metal workshops, which are mold makers, treat their workforce. So yeah, it's a very long. I don't think I have. I publish this. I try to publish this work in French first, so maybe for an English version we will have to do more work. Longer. It's been 6 months to really explore this. I think 6 months are needed. That's as simple as that. But thank you very much for all the comments. One's helping me to frame, one's a bit challenging, require me even to frame, but also to tell what is really important for me. And so thank you very, very, very much.
Thank you, Arnaud, for your response. I'm sure there will be 1 or 2 quick questions from the audience, as we are unfortunately running a little bit out of time, but I'm sure there will be.
Just to finish, maybe one thing on the walls, you're absolutely right, it's medical system.
Stephanie?
Yes, I have a question about the status of this work. And you have mentioned a number of evolutions, such as export, when they started exporting, also when Hindus joined the trade. There was an allusion to the role of women, the increasing role of women. You had no time to elaborate on it, but that seems to be happening too. So I was wondering, how do these 3 evolutions, how have they impacted the prestige, the social prestige of this profession? In your opinion?
Thanks for this question. That's a pretty hard one, actually. Entry of women, first of all, is, pretty shy even now. On the jobs of designer, you have many women. I mean, not many women, but you have not many designers. But the two main glass studios in India are run by women. It is different social class. One Lashmi Day from Delhi was taught in Firozabad, but also by a Czech glassmaker who was invited there from UNESCO program. Then she went in UK, so it's different class. But in Firozabad, women get into flame work. I mean, they still give them a bit less, less valued work. Like, for example, making Ganesh, they will arrange to give them the first part of the Ganesh. But still, I mean, before, women did not touch glass in general. So it's, and then you have, but it's something I need to look into. There are some craftsmen from the first generation who started this framework, became pretty famous. Now they are associated with the schemes from the local government, because we can say whatever with JP, but they made many schemes at least for skilling. And then these schemes are directed towards women and deprived communities such as scheduled caste. I need to look into it because, as you know very well, between what is announced for a scheme and that really happens is different. So then I mean, I need to look into it. It's a really interesting question. But I mean, if you see a Muslim Sheeshgarh who was Tarvala and then has converted to this glassworks, he says, I mean, he's proud of the skills of his daughter. And I know in older conceptions, I mean, women's skills were I mean, in the traditional Chalbati, just impossible that women get skilled. And I get it to Chalbati because the problem is that the factory work is absolutely horrible, I mean, to be frank. So it's not like women like in Firozabad, I want to work in factory. They work in the cleaning. So it's not valued work. But the few interviews we did with women, as you know, it's not easy. But they told us, yes, it's not very valued work, but anyway, I'm not really keen on working close to the furnace. So I mean, it's a complex issue. You have to look more into it. On this evolution to globalization, in terms of status, I have to look a bit more into it and into the data. I think it makes not much difference. If you're a master glass blower, you still. There may have been differences of status before, but after all, I'm not historian. I did a diachronic study to have a good context. If not, it would have been very flat. I could not have understood these processes. But I said like this, I don't believe that Tarvala, or, I mean, I don't know if by tradition, I think still Tarvalas are more valued even by from good blowers. So that may change because it's very hard to enter in some blowing factories, the one working for prestigious export brands, because there is a trade secret, because there is exploitation, and especially the Europeans insist, to not let European journalists and so on inside. But some specialists, I mean, the blonde quality has always been much poorer than the Bengals. In the semis, I came because there is a database of types of India, and I came into observation from a colonial administrator in the 1930s. So when this killing comes, these Sheeshgarhs with the Europeans, they got so much better in wiring. But he says these very conservative craftsmen are very reluctant to go into the glass blowing, unfortunately. So it has, I mean, and people say it was very poorly developed, in the 90s. So, I mean, blonde glass has always been known in Firozabad, but in a very poor way. They say themselves, and then it enhanced. So this is a question for next few years, and I would need to meet these colleagues, which is not easy, much harder than in the Bengal industry, because Bengal makers, they don't care. Everybody knows that there is child labor in Bengal industry, But these very special colleagues, what is their status? I have 2-3 interviews of one guy who also worked in the NID in Ahmedabad, called Papu. But yeah, that's you're really pointing at more plans for the next few work, things to explore.
Is there any final question for Arnaud? compliment.
I have a question if anyone wants to, if there are no other questions. Are there any other questions?
Well, I guess go ahead.
Arnaud, have you given any thought to the sort of work in, oh, wait a second, sorry. Have you given any thought to how your work on these skilled artisans might perhaps connect to, you know, classical works in history, like William Sewell's work in Revolution in France? Works like this, which try to bring out the consciousness of this particular segment, the radicality, unlike what one might predict from other kinds of, from say certain kinds of Marxism. This strata sometimes has very even revolutionary consciousness. And I mean, I hesitate to bring up a work on France with you, Arnaud, but I'd just like to know, is that kind of thing anywhere in the background in your work on these, you know, carigers who are also, as you say, at times the vanguard of these struggles?
Well, actually, thank you very much, Shankar, for his comment, because I've not really gone through his work, and but yeah, what you suggest is really exciting. So I directly go to look into it. Indeed, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Arnaud, for these punchy concluding words. If there are no more questions, I cordially invite you to consider attending next week's seminar, as Stephanie Tamalava will present, and the title is Participatory Democracy in India, Incarnation, Transformation and Institutionalization, ? And in fact, I will be forwarding your introduction and first chapter in the next few minutes for those who are interested in attending. On these words, I would like to thank you once again, Shankar, for your insightful comments, and of course, Arnaud, for your extremely rich presentation. And now for those who have the luxury of being with us at CSH, we have a few drinks for those who are interested to unwind and discuss more points on Arnaud's work. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully see you next week.
Thank you very much, Shankar, and thanks everyone.